My name is Carmen, and I'm 34 years old. My world shattered 3 months ago when my husband Michael died unexpectedly from a heart attack at only 37. We had 10 beautiful years together, building our real estate business from nothing into something we were proud of. But nothing prepared me for what happened after his funeral when my sister Leanne pulled me aside and claimed her 8-year-old son Jackson was actually Michael's biological child. She even waved a document she called his will. If you're watching from somewhere, life has thrown you a devastating curveball. Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and let me show you how I discovered the truth behind my sister's lies. I met Michael during my final year of college in Boston. I was a small-town girl with big dreams studying business while working part-time at a coffee shop near campus. Michael would come in every morning, always ordering the same thing, a black coffee and a blueberry muffin. He was trying to establish himself as a real estate agent, working longer hours than anyone I knew, determined to succeed in a competitive market. Our first real conversation happened when he spilled his entire coffee all over his portfolio right before a big client meeting. I helped him clean up, made him a new drink, and gave him my copy of a business magazine that had an article about the property he was trying to sell. He asked me out the next day, and from that moment we were inseparable. We got married 2 years later in a simple but beautiful ceremony at my parents' lakeside cabin in Michigan. Nothing fancy, but it was perfect for us. My sister Leanne was there with her various boyfriends. She seemed to change them every few months back then. Our mum cried happy tears, and my dad gave a heartfelt speech about working hard and loving harder. After the wedding, Michael and I poured everything into building our real estate business. The first 2 years were brutal nights, weekends, any hour a client needed us. But slowly it began to pay off. We established a reputation for honesty and personal attention that larger agencies couldn't match. By our 5th year of marriage, we had our own office with 4 additional agents working with us. The one shadow over our happiness was our struggle with infertility. We started trying for a baby around our 3rd anniversary, expecting it to happen quickly. When it didn't, we began the exhausting journey of tests, treatments, and specialists. The disappointment each month was crushing, especially for Michael, who had always talked about wanting to be a dad. After 3 years of treatments, we made the difficult decision to stop 2 years ago. The emotional toll had become too much, and our doctor had been increasingly pessimistic about our chances. We decided instead to focus on our business travel more and consider other paths to parenthood when we were ready. Our close friends Brian and Kate were our rocks through all of this. Brian had been Michael's roommate in college, and Kate and I hit it off immediately when they started dating. The 4 of us had a standing dinner date every month, and they never treated us with the awkward pity that some friends did after learning about our fertility struggles. Michael was generally healthy, though he did have occasional stress-related issues. He would sometimes get migraines during particularly hectic work periods, and his doctor had mentioned slightly elevated blood pressure at his last physical. Nothing that seemed concerning enough to change our lifestyle. Last year, we finally bought our dream home, a beautiful craftsman-style house with a wraparound porch and a view of the city skyline. It was a major milestone for us, the physical representation of everything we'd worked for. Michael spent weekends refinishing the hardwood floors and building a garden box where he planned to grow vegetables. I focused on creating a welcoming interior, hunting for the perfect pieces at estate sales and antique stores. My relationship with my sister Leanne had always been complicated. Growing up, she was the rebellious one, always in trouble, while I was the responsible eldest. That dynamic never really changed into adulthood. Leanne bounced between jobs and relationships, never settling. When she got pregnant with Jackson, she was between boyfriends and wouldn't say who the father was. Our parents helped her financially until Jackson was about 3, when they finally cut her off, tired of her constant demands. That's when Michael and I started helping. We paid for Jackson's preschool, bought him clothes and birthday gifts, and occasionally covered Leanne's rent when she was between jobs. Michael was especially soft-hearted about helping Jackson, saying no, child should suffer for their parents' choices. I adored my nephew Jackson from the moment he was born. Despite my complicated relationship with Leanne, I wanted to be the kind of aunt who made a difference in his life. I took him for weekends sometimes when Leanne needed a break, taught him to ride a bike, and never missed his school performances. Michael was good with Jackson too, though not unusually so. They would play catch in the backyard or build Lego sets together during family gatherings. Normal uncle stuff. Nothing that ever made me think there was a deeper connection. Just 1 month before Michael died, we took a vacation to Hawaii, a trip we'd been planning for years. It was perfect 10 days of sunshine, adventure, and reconnecting. We went snorkeling, took a helicopter tour over volcanoes, and spent lazy evenings watching the sunset from our balcony. Michael seemed so healthy, so vibrant. We talked about our next 10 years together, making plans for the business, more travel, maybe finally exploring adoption. The day before Michael's heart attack was completely normal. We had dinner with Brian and Kate at our favorite Italian restaurant. Michael had his usual spaghetti and meatballs and a glass of red wine. We talked about an upcoming industry conference and debated the merits of different Hawaiian beaches. Michael and Brian made plans to go golfing that weekend. I remember Michael laughing so hard at one of Brian's stories that he had tears in his eyes. That's how I try to remember him now, full of life and joy, not how I found him the next morning. The morning started like any other. Michael made coffee while I toasted bagels. We ate breakfast together at our kitchen island, discussing our schedules for the day. He had 3 showings planned, and I had a closing at 11. He kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me, and said he'd pick up dinner on his way home. It was so ordinary, so routine. I had no idea it was the last time I would see him alive. The call came at 10:30. I was preparing documents for my closing when my phone rang. It was Michael's assistant, Tara, her voice shaking as she told me Michael had collapsed during a property showing. The clients had called an ambulance, and he was being taken to Boston Memorial. I dropped everything and drove there in a daze, running red lights, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. But I arrived too late. The emergency room doctor met me in the waiting area, his face solemn as he explained that Michael had suffered a massive heart attack. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't save him. Just like that, in the space of an hour, I became a widow at 34. The next moments are a blur in my memory. I remember screaming, collapsing into a chair, a nurse bringing me water I couldn't drink. Someone asked if I wanted to see him, and I nodded numbly. They led me to a small room where Michael lay, looking peaceful but unmistakably gone. I touched his face, still warm but vacant of the vibrant spirit that had animated it just hours before. I kept expecting him to open his eyes to smile and say it was all a terrible mistake. I don't know how long I sat there holding his hand before the hospital staff gently suggested I call someone. I called Brian first, my fingers barely able to work my phone. He and Kate arrived within 20 minutes, Kate immediately wrapping me in a hug while Brian spoke with the doctors about next steps. I had to call Michael's parents in Florida, a conversation so painful I could barely get the words out. Then my parents, who promised to drive up from Rhode Island first thing in the morning. Finally, Leanne. Her reaction struck me as odd even through my grief. She became hysterical on the phone, wailing loudly about poor Michael, despite the fact that she and Michael had never been particularly close. At the time, I attributed it to her tendency for drama, but looking back, it was the first red flag. That first night in our house without Michael was surreal. Kate stayed over sleeping on the couch after making me take a sleeping pill. I lay in our guest room, unable to face our bed. Every corner of the house held memories of him, his coffee mug still in the sink, his shoes by the door, his toothbrush next to mine. The ordinary remnants of a life suddenly ended. The next few days passed in a fog of necessary tasks. Michael's business partner, Daniel, took over all pending deals and client meetings, shielding me from work concerns. Brian helped with the practical aspects of death, contacting the funeral home, obtaining death certificates, notifying Michael's clients and colleagues. Choosing Michael's burial clothes was unexpectedly devastating. I selected his favorite navy suit, the one he wore to special client meetings and our anniversary dinners. As I searched for his silver cufflinks in his closet, I found a folded paper tucked into his suit pocket. A handwritten bucket list he'd been working on. See the Northern Lights with Carmen. Learn to sail. Visit all 50 states together. Grow old on a porch with the love of my life. I collapsed on the closet floor, clutching that paper, the finality of all our unfinished plans overwhelming me. Sleep became impossible. I would doze fitfully for an hour or two before jerking awake, reaching for Michael before remembering all over again. My phone constantly buzzed with messages and calls from friends, clients, and colleagues, all expressing shock and offering help I didn't know how to accept. 3 days after Michael died, I met with our family attorney, Harold. He was a grandfatherly man who had helped us set up our business structure years earlier. This initial meeting was just to cover immediate concerns, our joint accounts, death certificates, funeral arrangements. Harold was kind but professional, promising we would address the will and estate matters after the funeral. Leanne arrived in town 2 days before the funeral, staying at our parents' hotel rather than with me. She brought Jackson, which was expected, but what was strange was how she kept him away from me. Normally, Jackson would run to hug his Aunt Calm the moment he saw me, but this time he stayed glued to Leanne's side, looking confused and uncomfortable. I also noticed Leanne huddled in corners with our mother several times, their conversations stopping abruptly when I approached. Mom looked troubled after these talks, giving me strange, pitying looks. At the time, I was too consumed by grief to investigate, but these were more warning signs of what was to come. The funeral service was larger than I expected. Michael had touched many lives through his work and friendship, and the chapel was filled beyond capacity. Colleagues, clients, college friends and family members all came to pay their respects. I sat in the front row between my parents, feeling disconnected from my body as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. When it came time for me to speak, I somehow found the strength to share brief memories of our life together. Our first meeting over spilled coffee, his patience teaching me to ski, the way he left little notes in my laptop bag before business trips. I talked about his integrity in business and his generosity with friends and family. My voice broke only once when I mentioned how he would never have the chance to become the amazing father I knew he would have been. Daniel spoke next, sharing stories of Michael's professional accomplishments and the impact he had made on their clients' lives. He described Michael as the most ethical person he'd ever worked with, someone who prioritized doing right by people over making the biggest commission. I was grateful for his words, a testament to the man Michael was in all aspects of his life. Throughout the service, I kept noticing Leanne's unusual behavior. Rather than sitting with our extended family in the second row, she positioned herself prominently in the first row on the opposite side, directly across from me. She held Jackson tightly against her, occasionally whispering in his ear. Jackson looked bewildered and sad, but not devastated, like a child who had lost his father would be. He kept looking at the photo of Michael displayed next to the casket with confusion rather than grief. My mother sat between Leanne and me, constantly dabbing at her eyes and occasionally patting my hand or Leanne's shoulder. She seemed torn, her attention divided in a way that struck me as odd, even in my grief-clouded state. After the burial service, everyone gathered at our home. Friends had organized everything, filling the kitchen with casseroles and desserts, arranging chairs, and managing the flow of visitors. I moved through my own house like a ghost, accepting condolences and hugs from people whose names I sometimes couldn't remember. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed Leanne wandering through the house, opening doors to rooms she had no reason to enter. She lingered in Michael's home office, examining the framed business licenses and awards on the wall. She picked up and studied family photos, particularly ones of Michael. When she thought no one was watching, she opened drawers in his desk, quickly shutting them when other guests approached. Jackson played quietly with some other children in the living room, occasionally glancing at his mother with a worried expression. I tried to give him a hug at one point, but Leanne quickly called him to her side before I could reach him. As evening approached and guests began to leave, Leanne asked to speak with me privately. Something in her tone sent a chill through me, but I agreed, leading her to the sunroom at the back of the house where we could have some privacy. My mother followed uninvited, closing the door behind her. "Carmen, there's something you need to know." Leanne began, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality I recognized from her numerous dramatic announcements over the years. "I've been keeping a secret for a long time, but with Michael gone, I can't keep it anymore." I sat perfectly still, a sense of dread washing over me. "Jackson is Michael's son," she said, her eyes watching me closely for my reaction. "We had a brief affair 9 years ago, right before your wedding. It just happened once, but—" She trailed off, pulling Jackson closer to her side. The world seemed to stop spinning. I looked at Jackson, searching his face for any resemblance to my husband. The boy looked frightened and confused. "That's impossible," I finally managed to say. "Michael would never have—" "He did," Leanne interrupted. "And he knew about Jackson. He's been supporting us quietly all these years." Before I could respond, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. "He also gave me this 2 years ago. He wanted Jackson to be taken care of if anything happened to him." The paper she handed me appeared to be a handwritten will, stating that Michael wanted my son Jackson to receive what he deserves as my biological child, including half of all my assets and business interests. It was signed with what looked like Michael's signature and dated 2 years earlier. "He gave this to you 2 years ago," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, when you two decided to stop trying for a baby. He realized Jackson would be his only child and wanted to make sure he was provided for." My mother placed her hand on my shoulder. "Carmen, I know this is a shock, but family should come first now. We need to honor Michael's wishes." I stared at them both, unable to process what was happening. Jackson looked up at his mother, clearly not understanding the conversation. I want you both to leave, now." My voice was calm but firm. "But Carmen, we need to discuss how to handle this," Leanne protested. "Jackson deserves half of everything. The business, the house, the investments. It's what Michael wanted." "Get out of my house," I repeated, standing up. "Take your lies and get out." Leanne's expression hardened. "This isn't over. I'll be talking to a lawyer." As they gathered their things, Brian and Kate, who had stayed to help clean up, sensed something was wrong. They came to my side as Leanne and my mother left Jackson, looking back at me with confusion. The moment the door closed, I collapsed into a chair, the document still clutched in my hand. "What happened?" Kate asked, kneeling beside me. When I told them Leanne's claim, Brian's face flushed with anger. "That's absolute garbage," he said. "Michael would never have cheated on you, especially not with your sister." Kate took the document from my shaking hands. "This looks suspicious. You should call Harold first thing tomorrow." After they left, I spent the night sitting in Michael's home office, surrounded by remnants of our life together, wondering if I had ever really known the man I married. The night after the funeral was the longest of my life. Every memory of my relationship with Michael played on repeat in my mind as I searched for signs I might have missed. Had there been moments between him and Leanne that should have raised suspicions? Times when Jackson seemed too familiar with him, secret phone calls or unexplained absences. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reconcile Leanne's claims with the Michael I knew. The timing didn't add up either. 9 years ago, when Jackson would have been conceived, Leanne had been dating a guy named Troy. I distinctly remembered because she had brought him to our engagement party only to break up with him a month later. At first light, I called Harold's office and left a message explaining the urgency. He called back within an hour and agreed to see me immediately. When I arrived at his downtown office, Harold listened intently as I explained Leanne's claims and showed him the handwritten document. His initial reaction was one of professional skepticism. "This document, even if authentic, would not supersede a properly executed will," he explained. "And I have serious doubts about its authenticity. The signature looks similar to Michael's, but there are inconsistencies." Harold advised me that while the document was likely not valid, Leanne could still pursue a paternity claim on Jackson's behalf, which could complicate the estate proceedings. "If she's willing to go this far, we need to prepare for a potential legal battle," he said. "I suggest we gather evidence about Michael's relationship with your sister and any proof regarding Jackson's paternity." Leaving Harold's office, I felt simultaneously devastated and determined. The possibility that Michael had betrayed me with my own sister was gut-wrenching. But equally painful was the possibility that Leanne was exploiting his death for financial gain, using an innocent child as leverage. Back at home, I began examining photos of Michael with Jackson over the years. I had dozens from family gatherings, holidays, and the occasional weekend when Jackson stayed with us. Looking at them with fresh eyes, I searched for any sign of a special bond or physical resemblance. But all I saw was a kind uncle, with his nephew nothing more. In Michael's office, I found his old journals. He had kept them sporadically over the years, usually focusing on business goals and travel plans. I spent hours reading every entry around the time Jackson would have been conceived, and in the years after, finding nothing but loving references to me and our future together. No guilt, no secret references to a child, nothing to suggest he was hiding such a monumental secret. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Take all the time you need. I've got everything covered at the office. Let me know if you want me to handle the Stevens listing." His simple offer of practical support brought tears to my eyes. As I continued searching for answers, my mind kept returning to Leanne's history of manipulation. This wasn't the first time she had manufactured drama for attention or financial gain. When we were teenagers, she had once claimed to be dating a local college basketball star, going so far as to show us texts from him that she had actually sent herself from a burner phone. Years later, she had convinced our grandmother that she needed money for a medical procedure, only to use it for a vacation to Cancun. Could this be just another elaborate con? But why involve Jackson in something so potentially damaging? I spent the afternoon going through Michael's emails, finding only occasional normal exchanges with Leanne, typically about family gatherings or Jackson's birthday gifts. Nothing inappropriate, nothing secretive. That evening, I called Brian and asked him to meet me for coffee. Of all people, Michael's best friend since college would know if there had been an affair or secret child. "It's complete bull," Brian said firmly when we met at a quiet cafe near my house. "Michael adored you from the moment he met you. There's no way he would have cheated, especially not right before your wedding." He reminded me of how Michael had been during that time period, completely focused on our future, working extra hours to save for our honeymoon, talking about nothing but our wedding plans. And think about how he was with all our friends' kids, Brian added. He was great with them, but he was devastated that you two couldn't have children of your own. If he already had a son, why would he have put you both through years of fertility treatments? Brian's certainty strengthened my resolve to uncover the truth. Michael had been a man of integrity in business and in his personal life. I had seen him return money to clients when he felt they had overpaid, watched him work unpaid hours to help first-time homebuyers understand the process. It was impossible to reconcile that person with someone who would father a child and keep it secret from his wife for 8 years. That night, Kate called to suggest I join a support group for widows that had helped her cousin after her husband's death. It might help to talk to people who understand what you're going through, she said, and it could give you strength for whatever comes next with Leanne. As we talked, I felt the first stirrings of the strength I would need to fight for the truth and for Michael's legacy. This wasn't just about money or property, it was about protecting the memory of the man I had loved and lost. The next morning brought an unexpected call from Jackson's school teacher, Ms. Winters. She had heard about Michael's death and called to express condolences, but also mentioned something troubling. Jackson seems very confused, she said carefully. He told his classmates that his uncle died, but then said his mother told him it was actually his father. I thought you should know he's struggling with this sudden change in what he's been told about his family. Patian. This confirmed what I had suspected. Jackson himself had no idea about Leanne's claims until very recently. My heart broke for him, an innocent pawn in whatever game Leanne was playing. On Harold's recommendation, I met with Marissa, a private investigator who specialized in family matters. Her office was small but professional, with diplomas on the wall and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. In cases like this, she explained, people usually leave evidence. If your sister is fabricating this story, there will be inconsistencies we can document. If it's true, which seems unlikely from what you've told me, we'll find evidence of that too. We developed a strategic approach. First, Marissa would verify Leanne's whereabouts and relationships around the time of Jackson's conception. She would also research any financial connections between Michael and Leanne beyond what I already knew about. Meanwhile, I would continue gathering information from family members and looking for documentation that might support or refute Leanne's claims. As I left Marissa's office, my phone began flooding with notifications. Leanne had made a vague but suggestive post on social media. Some truths can't stay hidden forever. Justice coming soon for my son. #family secrets. Within hours, I received calls from various aunts, uncles, and cousins, all wanting to know what was happening. Leanne had apparently been calling family members, telling them her version of events before I could even process what was happening. My Aunt Debbie, my mother's sister, was particularly upset. How could you deny your own nephew his inheritance? She demanded clearly, having heard only the Leanne's side of the story. I realized I needed to temporarily step back from the business to focus on this personal crisis. Daniel was understanding when I called him. Take whatever time you need, he assured me. The business will be here when you're ready to return. His unwavering support meant everything, especially when I explained the situation. That doesn't sound like Michael at all, was his immediate response. And the timing is awfully convenient. Marissa worked quickly. Within 2 days, she had uncovered significant inconsistencies in Leanne's timeline. According to her research, Leanne had dated not just Troy, but 4 other men within a 6-month period around Jackson's conception. She was quite active socially during that time, Marissa explained delicately. Based on social media posts, credit card records, and witness statements, she was in relationships with multiple men when Jackson would have been conceived. But the most compelling evidence came from an unexpected source. Marissa discovered medical records from 9 years ago when Michael and I had first started trying for a baby. His initial fertility testing had shown a very low sperm count, a condition the doctor noted was likely long-standing. The specialist's notes indicate this was probably a congenital issue, Marissa explained, showing me the records. While not impossible, it would have been extremely difficult for Michael to father a child naturally even 9 years ago. This discovery hit me like a physical blow. On one hand, it was strong evidence against Leanne's claim. On the other, it was a painful reminder of the struggle Michael and I had faced in trying to have children. Looking back at photos of Jackson as a baby, I noticed something I had overlooked before. There was a striking resemblance between infant Jackson and Leanne's ex-boyfriend Troy. The same wide-set eyes, distinctive chin, even the cowlick in his hair. Marissa managed to locate Troy in Oregon, where he had moved shortly after breaking up with Leanne. The conversation with him was awkward but illuminating. "I always wondered if Jackson might be mine," Troy admitted after I explained the situation. "The timing fit, but Leanne insisted he wasn't. I offered to take a paternity test back then, but she refused and threatened to get a restraining order if I pushed it." Troy was shocked to hear about Leanne's claim that Michael was Jackson's father. "That's crazy. I met Michael a couple times when Leanne and I were together. He was totally devoted to you. There's no way anything happened between them." Troy offered to take a DNA test if it would help resolve the situation. "I've always felt bad about not being in Jackson's life, even though Leanne didn't give me much choice. If he's my son, I want to know." Meanwhile, Leanne had escalated her demands, sending formal letters through a lawyer threatening to sue for half of Michael's estate and business interests on Jackson's behalf. The letters described Michael as a deadbeat father who had financially abandoned his biological son while maintaining a public facade of childlessness. The characterization was so contrary to the man I knew that it strengthened my determination to fight back. In our safe deposit box, I found a collection of letters Michael had written to me over the years, including one from when we were in the depths of our fertility struggles. In it, he wrote poignantly about his sadness at not being able to father children, his guilt over his medical condition, and his hope that we might find another path to parenthood. "I've known since that first doctor's appointment that the problem was me," he had written. "I would give anything to change it to give you the children you deserve. Maybe someday we'll find another way to build our family, but please know that you are enough for me, more than enough. You will always be my whole world." Reading his words dated 5 years after Jackson was born confirmed what I already knew down in my heart. Michael could not possibly have known about having a biological child while writing those painful, honest words. The final piece of evidence came from a handwriting expert Harold arranged to examine the alleged will. After careful analysis, the expert concluded that while the signature bore similarities to Michael's, there were subtle differences consistent with forgery. More damning, the handwriting in the body of the document contained characteristics typical of Leanne's writing, based on samples I provided from birthday cards she had sent me over the years. Suddenly, the pieces began falling into place. Leanne hadn't just made up a story, she had created a document to support it, thinking no one would question a grieving sister's claims about a dead man's wishes. With mounting evidence against Leanne's claims, I was shocked when she actually filed a legal petition claiming inheritance rights for Jackson as Michael's biological heir. The court scheduled an emergency hearing to address the competing claims to the estate. Harold and I spent days preparing for the hearing, gathering all the evidence. We had collected medical records proving Michael's long-term infertility, the handwriting expert's analysis of the forged will timeline, discrepancies showing Leanne's relationship with Troy and other men during the conception period, and Troy's willingness to take a paternity test. The most significant discovery came just 2 days before the hearing, when Harold found Michael's actual will safely filed with his office. Michael had updated it 3 years earlier, leaving everything to me with specific charitable donations to causes we both supported. There was no mention of Jackson or any other children, but there was a letter attached to the will addressed to me. "In the event something happens to me," Michael had written, "know that I've arranged everything to be as simple as possible for you. You are my only family in the ways that truly matter, and everything I have is yours to do with as you see fit. I trust you completely." With all the evidence in place, Harold suggested we attempt one final meeting with Leanne before the hearing. "It might be better for everyone, especially Jackson, if we can resolve this privately," he advised. I agreed, and Harold arranged for Leanne to meet us at his office. She arrived looking confident with our mother in tow for moral support. The conference room felt tense as we all sat down, Leanne immediately adopting a victim's posture. Harold took control of the meeting with professional calm. "Before we proceed, I want to make sure everyone understands the seriousness of the claims that have been made," he began. "False claims against an estate can have significant legal consequences." He then methodically presented the evidence we had gathered. First, the medical records documenting Michael's infertility condition dating back 9 years. These records clearly establish that it would have been extremely difficult, though not impossible, for Michael to father a child, Harold explained. This medical condition was present before Jackson's conception. Next, he showed the handwriting expert's report on the document Leanne had presented. As you can see, the expert has identified numerous inconsistencies with Michael's actual signature, as well as characteristics in the body of the document that match Leanne's handwriting. My mother gasped at this, looking at Leanne with growing concern. Harold continued presenting the timeline evidence, showing Leanne's relationship with Troy and other men during the period when Jackson would have been conceived. "We've also spoken with Troy," I added, watching Leanne's face carefully. "He's always suspected he might be Jackson's father and is willing to take a paternity test." Leanne's facade began to crack. Her confident posture slumped and she glanced nervously at our mother. "Furthermore," Harold continued, "we have Michael's actual will properly executed and witnessed 3 years ago, which makes no mention of any children." He slid a copy across the table along with the attached letter Michael had written to me. Leanne barely glanced at it, her eyes now fixed on her lap. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Why, Leanne? How could you use Jackson this way? How could you try to destroy Michael's reputation and our relationship after he's gone?" Tears welled in Leanne's eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or another performance. "I needed the money," she finally admitted in a small voice. "Jackson's school is threatening to kick him out if I don't pay the overdue tuition. I thought since Michael always helped us anyway, and he's gone now. So you decided to claim he cheated on me and fathered your child." My voice was incredulous. "You were willing to tell Jackson that his uncle was actually his father, confusing and upsetting him just for money." Our mother looked horrified. "Leanne, is this true? You made it all up." Leanne's tears came faster now. "It's not like that Michael would have wanted to help Jackson. He always did. Michael was generous because he was a good person," I said firmly. "He helped Jackson because he cared about him as his nephew. But he would never have wanted his memory tarnished with lies, or for Jackson to be confused about his identity." I showed them the letter from Michael's fertility doctor, and the heartfelt letter he had written to me during our fertility struggles. "He couldn't have written these things knowing he had a son," I said quietly. "It would have been too cruel, too dishonest. And Michael was never cruel or dishonest." Leanne made one last desperate attempt to salvage her story. "Maybe he didn't know. Maybe I never told him Jackson was his." Harold interjected with professional firmness. "Ms. Stevens, I need to be very clear about the legal consequences of continuing with fraudulent claims. Presenting forged documents to the court is a criminal offence. If you proceed with this petition knowing the evidence against it, you could face serious charges." The reality of her situation finally seemed to hit Leanne. She broke down completely, admitting between sobs that she had fabricated the entire story, including the handwritten will. "I just needed money so badly," she cried. "Jackson's school is so expensive, and my job doesn't pay enough, and you have so much Carmen." Our mother, who had been quietly processing everything, finally spoke. "I can't believe you would do something like this, Leanne. To your own sister, to Jackson, to Michael's memory." The family fracture was painful to witness. My mother, who had initially seemed to support Leanne's claims, now looked torn between her daughters, unsure where her loyalty should lie. I made my position clear. "I'll drop any consideration of fraud charges on one condition: you withdraw all claims immediately and publicly acknowledge that your story was false. Jackson deserves to know the truth about who he is, and Michael deserves to have his reputation intact." Leanne nodded miserably, unable to meet my eyes. As they prepared to leave, I delivered my final ultimatum. "I won't press charges if you do the right thing now, but if you ever try something like this again or spread any more lies about Michael, I won't be so forgiving." Leanne left in tears, my mother following after giving me a conflicted, apologetic look. The victory felt hollow, the family bonds possibly damaged beyond repair. 1 month after the confrontation in Harold's office, I slowly began returning to work. Daniel had kept everything running smoothly, but clients were asking for me, and I knew I needed to re-engage with my life. The legal matters had been resolved relatively quickly once Leanne withdrew her claims. Harold finalized the probate process, transferring Michael's assets to me as his sole heir. The business continued to operate, though it felt different without Michael's energy and vision. At home, I finally began the painful process of sorting through Michael's belongings. Some things were easy to decide. About his suits would be donated. His favorite books would stay on our shelves. Other items were harder: the half-finished woodworking project in the garage, the collection of vintage watches he had inherited from his grandfather, the stack of travel guides for trips we would never take together. Kate came over several weekends to help, gently encouraging me to make decisions, but never pushing too hard. On her suggestion, I joined a grief support group that met weekly at a community centre downtown. The first meeting was awkward. I sat silently listening to others share stories of loss, but gradually I began to open up, finding unexpected comfort in the company of strangers who understood the landscape of grief in a way even my closest friends couldn't. At one of these meetings, I met Diana, whose husband had died in a car accident the previous year. Something about her practical approach to grief resonated with me. We started meeting for coffee before the group sessions, then for dinner occasionally. Her friendship became a lifeline different from my relationship with Kate, because Diana truly understood what it meant to rebuild a life alone. Despite everything that had happened with Leanne, I couldn't stop thinking about Jackson. He was an innocent child caught in his mother's deceptions, and I still cared deeply for him. After much consideration, I made a decision that surprised even me. Working with Harold, I established a small education fund for Jackson separate from Michael's estate. The terms were clear, the money could only be accessed for educational expenses, and Leanne would have to sign a legally binding document acknowledging that her claims about Michael's paternity were false. When Harold presented this offer to Leanne, she was initially suspicious, then tearfully grateful. Within days, she posted a public apology on social media, admitting that she had fabricated the story about Michael being Jackson's father out of financial desperation. "Carmen has shown me more grace than I deserve," she wrote. "Michael was a wonderful uncle to Jackson, not his father. I apologize to everyone I misled, especially my son and my sister." The post generated a flood of messages from extended family members, most apologizing for having believed Leanne's story. Some remained distant, uncomfortable with the family drama, but others made genuine efforts to reconnect. My relationship with my mother remained complicated. She called regularly, clearly trying to maintain relationships with both her daughters. I didn't make it easy for her, still hurt by her initial willingness to believe Leanne's lies. But gradually, we established a new normal, agreeing tacitly to focus on the present rather than rehash the painful recent past. Working with Daniel, I threw myself into growing the business, partly as a distraction and partly to honor Michael's legacy. We expanded into commercial real estate, something Michael had always wanted to explore. 6 months after his death, we closed our largest deal ever, a mixed-use development that would revitalize a struggling neighborhood. Standing in the empty lot after the closing, looking at the architectural renderings of what would soon rise there, I felt a bittersweet pride. Michael should have been there to see it, but I knew he would have been proud of what we accomplished. The success highlighted the strange contradiction of my new life. Professionally, things were better than ever. Personally, I was still navigating the complexities of grief healing from both Michael's death and my sister's betrayal. My mother, in her well-meaning way, had begun making comments about moving forward and meeting someone new. I wasn't ready and told her so directly. But privately, I acknowledged that the crushing weight of grief had begun to lighten somewhat. Diana introduced me to a hiking group she had joined, suggesting the physical activity and time in nature might be therapeutic. Our first hike was challenging. I was embarrassingly out of shape, but the exhaustion felt cleansing somehow. I began joining them weekly, gradually building my strength and enjoying the camaraderie of people who knew nothing about my complicated past. One evening, sorting through a drawer in Michael's nightstand, I found his bucket list again. I had forgotten about it in the chaos of everything that had happened. Looking at it with clearer eyes, I made a decision. I couldn't complete all his dreams for him, but perhaps I could honor some of them. The Grand Canyon had been third on his list. We had always talked about going, but somehow other trips always took priority. I booked a trip for the following month, planning to stay at the historic lodge on the rim and hike down to the river. Standing at the edge of that magnificent chasm at sunrise, a small container of Michael's ashes in my hand, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since his death. I scattered just a small portion of his ashes into the canyon, watching as they caught the early morning light before disappearing into the vastness below. In that moment, I realized that family isn't always defined by blood or even marriage. Sometimes it's defined by who stays when things fall apart, who tells you the truth even when lies would be easier, who honors their commitments even when you're not there to hold them accountable. Michael had been my true family. So had Brian and Kate Diana, and even Harold in his professional but kind way. Leanne and I shared parents, but she had proven that blood ties can be meaningless without the character to honor them. As I hiked back up from the canyon rim, physically exhausted but mentally clearer than I had been in months, I thought about Michael's true legacy. It wasn't the business, the house, or any material possession. It was the example he set of integrity, kindness, and unwavering loyalty. Those were the qualities I wanted to carry forward, the true inheritance he had left me. Sometimes the hardest storms in life show you who's really willing to hold the umbrella. I lost a husband, and in many ways a sister, but I found my strength, and built a new life that honors Michael's true legacy. And that's worth more than any inheritance could ever be. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through life's toughest challenges. And remember, sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family we need. The family we need is the one we build through love, loyalty, and showing up when it matters most.